The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the classroom as Andre Wilson clutched his backpack straps tightly. It was his first day at Westfield Elementary, and his stomach was doing somersaults. Moving to a new town halfway through 5th grade wasn't easy, but his mom had promised him things would be better here. "You'll be fine," she had whispered that morning, straightening his collar before he left. "Just be yourself." Andre had nodded, but the truth was, being himself hadn't always worked out so well at his old school. The principal, a tall woman with kind eyes, led him down the hallway. Their footsteps echoed against the polished floors as they passed colorful bulletin boards and student artwork. "Mrs. Powell's class is right around the corner," the principal said. "They're a wonderful bunch of kids. And you're just in time for music class afterward." Andre perked up at that. Music was the one thing that made him feel at home no matter where he was. His grandmother had taught him to play piano since he was 5, sitting him on phone books so he could reach the keys properly. Those lessons in her small living room with the smell of cinnamon and the sound of her gentle encouragement were his favorite memories. When they reached the classroom door, the principal gave a soft knock before opening it. 24 pairs of curious eyes turned to look at Andre, who tried his best not to shrink under their gaze. "Mrs. Powell, this is Andre Wilson, your new student," the principal announced. A woman with curly brown hair and glasses approached with a warm smile. "Welcome, Andre. We're so happy to have you join us." She gestured to an empty desk near the window. "You can sit right there next to Lily." Andre made his way to the desk, aware of the whispers and stares that followed him. A girl with braids and bright green barrettes smiled at him as he sat down. "I'm Lily," she whispered. "Don't worry about math. Mrs. Powell explains everything twice." Andre managed a small smile back. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. The morning passed in a blur of introductions and lessons. Mrs. Powell was patient, pausing to make sure Andre understood the material they were covering. By lunchtime, he had already learned most of his classmates' names and felt a little less like an outsider. After lunch came the period Andre had been looking forward to all day: music class. The students lined up at the door, chattering excitedly. "Mrs. Winters is strict," Lily warned him as they walked down the hall. "But we're learning about famous composers, which is pretty cool." Andre nodded, thinking of the classical music his grandmother had played for him. "I like Chopin," he said quietly. Lily looked impressed. "Wow, you know about composers already? Maybe you'll be Mrs. Winters' favorite." They entered the music room, a large space with chairs arranged in a semicircle. Various instruments lined the walls: recorders, xylophones, tambourines. But what caught Andre's eye immediately was the grand piano in the corner. It wasn't as old or well-loved as his grandmother's upright, but it was beautiful, its black surface gleaming under the fluorescent lights. A thin woman with graying blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun stood at the front of the room. Her posture was rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line as she watched the students file in. "Seats, everyone," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Quickly now." The students hurried to sit down. Andre followed Lily to a spot in the second row. Mrs. Winters' gaze swept over the class, pausing when it landed on Andre. Something in her expression shifted, so subtle that if Andre hadn't been watching closely, he might have missed it. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a tightening around the mouth. "I see we have a new student," she said, glancing down at a paper on her desk. "Andre Wilson." "Yes, ma'am," Andre replied politely. Mrs. Winters looked at him for a beat longer than necessary. "Well, Andre, we maintain high standards in this music class. I hope you can keep up." A few students exchanged glances. Andre felt his cheeks warm but kept his expression neutral. "I'll try my best, ma'am." "We'll see," Mrs. Winters said, turning to write on the whiteboard. "Today we continue our study of the great European composers who shaped classical music as we know it." As she spoke, Andre noticed how her voice warmed when she called on certain students: Tyler with his neatly combed hair, Charlotte with her perfect posture, and cooled noticeably when addressing others, particularly Deshawn, who sat in the back row. When Lily raised her hand to ask a question about Mozart, Mrs. Winters smiled. "Excellent question, Lily. That shows real musical curiosity." But when Deshawn raised his hand minutes later, Mrs. Winters sighed almost imperceptibly.
"Yes, Deshawn?"
"Did any African Americans write classical music too?" he asked. Mrs. Winters' smile tightened. "We're focusing on the established classical canon, Deshawn. Perhaps in a different unit." She quickly moved on without elaborating, though Andre knew the answer was yes. His grandmother had taught him about composers like William Grant Still and Florence Price. Throughout the lesson, Andre found himself drawn to the piano in the corner. During a moment when Mrs. Winters was helping a student with a worksheet, he slipped from his seat and approached it, his fingers itching to feel the cool ivory keys. He was just reaching out when Mrs. Winters' voice cut through the air like ice. "Andre Wilson, step away from that instrument immediately." The room fell silent. Andre froze, his hand still extended. I'm sorry," he stammered. "I just wanted to see." "That is an expensive piece of equipment," Mrs. Winters said, striding toward him. "Not a toy for curious fingers. Please return to your seat." As Andre turned to go back, he heard her mutter, "Some students think they can touch whatever they please." He felt the stares of his classmates as he sat down, his ears burning with embarrassment. Lily gave him a sympathetic look. "She doesn't let anyone touch the piano," she whispered. "Don't take it personally." But something in Mrs. Winters' tone had felt very personal. The rest of the class passed slowly. Andre kept his eyes on his worksheet, filling in the names of composers and their famous works. He knew most of the answers, his grandmother had made sure of that, but he found himself second-guessing, not wanting to draw attention. As the period neared its end, Mrs. Winters announced their upcoming project. "Next week, each of you will give a short presentation on a classical composer of your choice. You'll need to research their life, contributions, and play a short excerpt of their music." Andre's interest sparked despite his earlier discomfort. This was something he could do well. When the bell rang, students began gathering their things. Andre was sliding his worksheet into his folder when Mrs. Winters approached his desk. "Andre," she said, her voice quieter now that most students were leaving, "I noticed you seem to have an interest in the piano." Andre nodded cautiously. "Yes, ma'am. My grandmother taught me to play." Something flickered across Mrs. Winters' face. Surprise, perhaps, or doubt. "Is that so? And what kind of music did your grandmother teach you? Gospel, jazz?" The way she said it made it clear she didn't believe he knew anything else. "Some of that," Andre said carefully, "but mostly classical. Chopin is my favorite." Mrs. Winters raised an eyebrow. "Chopin requires technical skill and emotional depth. Years of proper training." "My grandma had a music degree," Andre said, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. "She played with the city orchestra before she retired." Mrs. Winters looked as though she wanted to say something more, but instead pressed her lips together. "Well, we'll see how you do on the composer project. I expect everyone to meet the same standards in my classroom." She turned and walked back to her desk, dismissing him without another word. As Andre left the music room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd somehow failed a test he didn't know he was taking. Outside in the hallway, he found Deshawn waiting. "Hey, new kid," Deshawn said. "Don't worry about Mrs. Winters, she's like that with some of us." Andre understood the unspoken message in Deshawn's words. It wasn't anything new. He'd faced similar situations before, but somehow he'd hoped this school would be different. "Thanks," he said to Deshawn. "I'm not worried." But as they walked back to their regular classroom, Andre couldn't help thinking about the piano in the corner and how Mrs. Winters had looked at him when he'd mentioned Chopin. He thought about his grandmother, who had always told him music belonged to everyone who loved it enough to learn it. That night at home, as his mother prepared dinner in their small kitchen, Andre sat at their old electric keyboard with headphones plugged in. His fingers moved over the keys, finding the familiar patterns of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece his grandmother had taught him before she passed away last year. "How was your first day?" his mother asked when he finally took off the headphones for dinner. Andre considered telling her about Mrs. Winters, about the look in her eyes and the doubt in her voice. But his mother was already working 2 jobs to support them after the move. She had enough to worry about. "It was fine," he said instead. "The music teacher has a really nice piano. Maybe someday you'll play it," his mother said, serving him a plate of spaghetti. Andre twirled pasta around his fork, thinking about Mrs. Winters and her clear opinion of what he could and couldn't do. "Yeah," he said quietly, "someday." What he didn't say was that he was already planning his composer presentation, already imagining the surprise on Mrs. Winters' face when she realized what he could do. His grandmother had always told him that actions spoke louder than words. Maybe it was time to let his music do the talking. The next few weeks Westfield Elementary were a mix of good and bad for Andre. He made friends easily in Mrs. Powell's class. Lily and Deshawn had quickly welcomed him into their lunch table group. And even quiet Tyler had started saving him a spot during library time. But music class with Mrs. Winters remained a challenge that Andre dreaded twice a week. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Andre sat at his desk working on a math problem when the classroom door opened. The principal entered with a smile, carrying a stack of colorful flyers. "Good morning, students. I have an exciting announcement," she said, handing the flyers to Mrs. Powell to distribute. "Our annual spring music showcase will be held next month, and this year we're doing something special." Andre took a flyer as it was passed around, his eyes scanning the bright yellow paper. "Celebrating musical journeys around the world," the headline read. Below was an illustration of children playing various instruments. "Each grade will perform pieces from different musical traditions," the principal continued, her voice warm with enthusiasm. "Mrs. Winters will be selecting students for special performances based on their skills and progress." A murmur of excitement rippled through the classroom. Even Andre felt a flutter of hope. Maybe this was his chance to show what he could do to prove himself to Mrs. Winters. "Will we get to choose what we play?" Lily asked, raising her hand. The principal smiled. "Mrs. Winters will be making those decisions, but I'm sure she'll consider your interests." As they headed to music class later that day, Andre clutched his notebook tightly. He'd been working on his composer project, researching Chopin's life and accomplishments. Maybe if Mrs. Winters saw how much he knew, she'd give him a chance with the piano. The music room seemed different today. There was an air of excitement as students discussed the showcase. Mrs. Winters stood at the front, her posture as rigid as ever, but there was a gleam in her eye that Andre hadn't seen before. "Settle down, everyone," she said, tapping her baton against the music stand. "Yes, I'm sure you've all heard about the spring showcase. It's an important event that showcases our music program to the entire school and parents." She began walking between the rows of chairs, her heels clicking against the floor. "This is an opportunity for those who have demonstrated both skill and proper respect for musical traditions to shine." Her gaze swept across the room, lingering briefly on Andre before moving on. "Today we'll continue our composer study, and then I'll be evaluating each of you for potential showcase roles." As the lesson began, Andre noticed that Mrs. Winters called on certain students more than others. When Charlotte gave a partially correct answer about Mozart's childhood, Mrs. Winters praised her attempt. "Excellent thinking, Charlotte. You're getting closer to understanding the nuances of musical history." But when Deshawn correctly identified a Beethoven symphony, she merely nodded curtly and moved on without comment. Andre raised his hand several times during the discussion, but Mrs. Winters seemed not to see him. It wasn't until nearly the end of the lesson that she finally called on him. "Andre, you have something to add?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I was going to say that Chopin wrote most of his music for solo piano, and he was inspired by Polish folk music for his mazurkas." Mrs. Winters blinked, clearly surprised by his knowledge. "That's correct," she admitted. Then her expression hardened slightly. "Though I wonder if you're merely repeating something without understanding its cultural context." Andre felt his cheeks warm. "My grandmother explained how composers often used folk music from their homelands in their classical pieces. She said it was a way of bringing their heritage into formal music." A few students turned to look at him with newfound interest. Mrs. Winters' lips pressed into a thin line. "Well," she said after a moment, "let's move on to our evaluation for the showcase." One by one, she called students to the front of the room. Some were asked to sing a simple scale, others to clap a rhythm pattern. Tyler, who had been taking violin lessons since first grade, was asked to play a short piece he'd been practicing. When it was Andre's turn, he stood and walked to the front, heart pounding. This was his chance. Mrs. Winters looked at him with an assessing gaze. "Andre, please clap this rhythm after me." She tapped out a simple pattern. Andre's heart sank. Everyone else had been asked to demonstrate their best skills, but she wasn't even giving him a chance with the piano. He clapped the rhythm perfectly, then took a deep breath. "Mrs. Winters, I can play piano too. Could I show you?" The room fell silent. Mrs. Winters' eyebrows rose. "That won't be necessary today. We're focusing on basic rhythm assessment. But how will you know if I'm good enough for the showcase if you don't hear me play?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them. Mrs. Winters's expression cooled. "Are you questioning my teaching methods, Andre?" He swallowed hard. "No, ma'am. I just thought—" "You may return to your seat," she interrupted. "I'll be making my decisions based on overall musical aptitude and classroom behavior." As Andre walked back to his chair, he caught Deshawn's eye. The other boy gave him a small nod of solidarity, and somehow that made the sting a little less sharp. At the end of class, Mrs. Winters posted a list on the door. "These are preliminary showcase assignments," she announced. "They may change based on your progress in the coming weeks." Students crowded around the list, exclaiming with excitement or disappointment. Andre waited until most had dispersed before approaching. He ran his finger down the page looking for his name. There it was, near the bottom. Andre Wilson. Percussion. Triangle. The triangle. The instrument they gave to kids who couldn't play anything else. "One note over and over? Tough break," Deshawn said, appearing beside him. His name was listed under chorus back row. Andre shrugged, trying to hide his disappointment. "It's fine," but it wasn't fine. As he walked home that afternoon, kicking at loose stones on the sidewalk, Andre couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Winters had already decided what he was capable of, without ever giving him a real chance. His mother was still at work when he got home, her shift at the hospital not ending until evening. The apartment felt empty and quiet as he dropped his backpack by the door and headed to the old keyboard set up in the corner of the living room. He plugged in the headphones and began to play, losing himself in Chopin's Nocturne. His grandmother had taught him that music was a place where you could put all your feelings: joy, sadness, anger, hope. Today his fingers pressed the keys with an intensity that surprised even him. When his mother came home, she found him still playing, so absorbed that he didn't hear her enter. She watched for a moment before gently touching his shoulder. Andre jumped, pulling off the headphones. "Oh, I didn't hear you come in." His mother smiled, but her eyes were concerned. "You play like that when something's bothering you. What happened at school?" Andre considered brushing it off as he had before, but the weight of the day's disappointment was too heavy to carry alone. As they sat eating dinner, he told her about Mrs. Winters, the showcase, and the triangle assignment. His mother listened quietly, her fork paused halfway to her mouth. When he finished, she set down her utensils and took a deep breath. "Andre," she said carefully, "sometimes people have ideas about who we are based on how we look, not who we actually are or what we can do." "You mean because I'm black?" Andre asked. It wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation. She nodded. "It's not fair and it's not right. But you have two choices when it happens. You can let their small thinking define you, or you can show them how wrong they are." Andre pushed his peas around his plate. "I tried to tell her I could play, but she wouldn't listen." "Then maybe you need to make her listen," his mother said. There was a determined gleam in her eye that Andre recognized. It was the same look she had when the landlord tried to delay fixing their heating last winter, or when the previous school had suggested Andre was too active for advanced classes. "How?" "I think you need to practice extra hard and find a way to show her what you can really do," she said. "And this weekend we're going to visit the community center downtown. I heard they have a music program on Saturdays." The community center turned out to be an old building with peeling paint, but a surprisingly well-maintained music room. The director, Mr. Chen, was a retired music teacher who ran the weekend program as a volunteer. "We focus on giving kids access to instruments and instruction they might not get at school," he explained as he showed Andre and his mother around. "No auditions, no pressure, just the joy of making music." When Mr. Chen learned that Andre could play Chopin, his eyebrows shot up. "Would you mind showing me?" he asked, gesturing to an upright piano in the corner. Andre sat down nervously, aware of his mother and Mr. Chen watching. But as soon as his fingers touched the keys, everything else faded away. He played the nocturne from memory, the familiar notes flowing from his hands as naturally as breathing. When he finished, Mr. Chen was staring at him with an expression of delighted surprise. "Andre, that was excellent. You have a real gift. Who taught you to play like that?" "My grandmother," Andre said, a lump forming in his throat. "Before she died last year," Mr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "She taught you well. You have excellent technique and more importantly, you play with feeling." He turned to Andre's mother. "We'd be honored to have him join our program. He could continue with piano and I'd like to work with him on expanding his repertoire." For the first time in weeks, Andre felt a spark of hope. Here was someone who saw what he could do, who didn't make assumptions about his abilities. On the bus ride home, his mother squeezed his hand. "See, Mr. Chen recognized your talent right away." Andre nodded, looking out the window at the passing city. "Yeah, but Mrs. Winters still won't let me play piano in the showcase." His mother's expression turned thoughtful. "Not yet. But the showcase is still weeks away, and a lot can change in that time." Andre wasn't sure he believed that Mrs. Winters would ever change her mind about him. But as the bus rumbled toward home, he made a decision. He would keep practicing, keep learning, keep getting better, and somehow he would find a way to show not just Mrs. Winters, but everyone at Westfield Elementary what he could really do. The weeks leading up to the spring showcase flew by in a blur of regular classes, twice-weekly music lessons with Mrs. Winters, and Saturday sessions at the community center with Mr. Chen. Andre felt like he was living in two different musical worlds. At the community center, Mr. Chen treated him with respect, challenging him to try new pieces and praising his natural talent. "Your grandmother gave you a solid foundation," he told Andre one Saturday after a particularly good session. "Now we're just building on what she started." But at school, Mrs. Winters continued to overlook him. During rehearsals for the showcase, she spent time working with the string quartet, the recorder ensemble, and even the chorus, giving detailed feedback and encouragement. Meanwhile, Andre and two other students assigned to triangle, tambourine and maracas, were simply told to keep the beat and then largely ignored. "This is boring," whispered Zoe, the girl with the tambourine, during one rehearsal as they sat waiting for their 4 measures of percussion at the end of a song. Andre nodded in agreement but kept his eyes on Mrs. Winters. He'd noticed that speaking out of turn was another way to get on her bad side. After rehearsal, Andre lingered in the music room, watching as Charlotte practiced a simple melody on the piano for her part in the showcase. Mrs. Winters stood beside her, nodding approvingly. "Very nice, Charlotte. Your progress is impressive. With a few more years of proper lessons, you could become quite accomplished." Charlotte beamed at the praise. Andre hung back by the percussion shelf, organizing the triangle and beaters even though they were already neatly arranged. When Charlotte finished and packed up her sheet music, Mrs. Winters noticed Andre still in the room. "Do you need something, Andre?" Her tone wasn't exactly unfriendly, but it held none of the warmth she'd just shown Charlotte. Andre took a deep breath. For 2 weeks, he'd been working up the courage for this moment. "Mrs. Winters, I was wondering if I could show you something I've been practicing." He moved toward the piano before she could refuse. Mrs. Winters frowned. "The rehearsal is over and I have a staff meeting in 15 minutes. "It won't take long," Andre promised, already sliding onto the piano bench. "Just 1 minute." He positioned his hands over the keys, ignoring the way Mrs. Winters' frown deepened. Then he began to play, not Chopin this time, but a simpler piece by Mozart that Mr. Chen had suggested might appeal to a traditional music teacher. The notes filled the room, clear and precise. Andre kept his focus on the keys, trying to show through his playing what Mrs. Winters had refused to hear in his words: that he deserved a real chance, that he could do more than hit a triangle on cue. When he finished, he looked up. Mrs. Winters' expression was unreadable. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Where did you learn to play that?" she asked after a moment. "My grandmother taught me basics, and now I'm taking lessons at the community center," Andre replied, hope rising in his chest. "Mr. Chen says I see," Mrs. Winters interrupted. She glanced at her watch. "Well, it's nice that you found a hobby, but the showcase arrangements have already been finalized. The piano parts have been assigned to students who've been in our program longer." Andre's hope deflated like a punctured balloon. "But perhaps next year, if you continue to improve and demonstrate the right attitude in class." Mrs. Winters began gathering her papers from the piano top. "Now I really must get to my meeting." As Andre walked home that afternoon, his triangle part tucked into his backpack, disappointment sat heavy in his chest. He'd played well, he knew he had, yet it hadn't made any difference. That evening, as he practiced on his keyboard, his mother paused in the doorway of their small living room. "You're playing differently tonight," she observed. "With more, I don't know, fire." Andre's fingers continued moving over the keys. "Mrs. Winters still won't let me play piano in the showcase." His mother sighed and sat beside him on the bench. What did she say? That maybe next year I can play if I have the right attitude, he said, the words bitter in his mouth. His mother was quiet for a moment, then placed her hand gently over his, stopping the music. Andre, look at me. He turned, seeing the serious expression in her eyes. Sometimes, she said carefully, people like Mrs. Winters have already made up their minds about who you are before they ever really see you. And no matter how good you are, they'll find a reason why it's not good enough. Andre nodded. It wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation. But that doesn't mean you stop trying, she continued. It just means you have to be so good they can't ignore you. And sometimes you have to make your own opportunities. The next day at school, news spread that the principal would be visiting classes to check on showcase preparations. In music class, there was an unusual buzz of nervous energy. Even Mrs. Winters seemed more tense than usual, rearranging sheet music and ensuring every instrument was perfectly placed. Today we'll run through the entire program, she announced. Remember, this showcase reflects not just on you as individuals, but on our entire music program. The principal arrived halfway through the rehearsal, slipping quietly into a chair at the back of the room. Mrs. Winters smiled brightly, a wide, unfamiliar expression that made Andre blink in surprise. We're just about to begin our world music segment, Mrs. Winters explained to the principal. Charlotte will play a piece inspired by traditional Asian melodies, followed by our percussion section representing rhythms of Africa. Andre felt his skin prickle at the way she said it, as if hitting a triangle 3 times somehow represented the complex musical traditions of an entire continent. He caught Deshawn's eye across the room, seeing his own discomfort reflected there. The rehearsal continued with Mrs. Winters calling on different students to demonstrate their parts. She was lavish with praise, especially when the principal nodded approvingly. And now, Mrs. Winters said as they neared the end, we'll finish with a special Viennese waltz, showcasing the elegant traditions of European classical music. She turned to the piano, where Tyler was supposed to play a simple accompaniment, while 2 students demonstrated a basic waltz step. But Tyler wasn't in his usual seat. Where is Tyler? Mrs. Winters asked, her smile faltering slightly. He went to the nurse, Lily volunteered. He said his stomach hurt really bad. Mrs. Winters' smile disappeared completely. This is most inconvenient. The piano part is essential for this demonstration. The principal leaned forward, looking concerned. Perhaps we could skip to another section? No, Mrs. Winters said quickly. This is the grand finale. We need it to bring everything together. She scanned the room desperately, her gaze passing over Andre as if he weren't there. Perhaps Charlotte could— I can play it, Andre said, standing up from his chair in the percussion section. All eyes turned to him. Mrs. Winters looked startled, then dismissive. That's not necessary. We'll simply explain the concept to the principal. But the principal was already showing interest. One of your percussion students can play piano as well? How versatile. Mrs. Winters' smile became fixed. Andre has had some informal lessons, but he's not familiar with this particular piece. It was now or never. Andre stepped forward. Actually, I looked at Tyler's music last week. I can play it, the principal beamed. Wonderful. It's so important for students to help each other out. Trapped? Mrs. Winters gestured stiffly toward the piano. Very well, Andre, let's see if you can manage it. The room fell silent as Andre walked to the piano bench. His heart hammered in his chest, but his hands were steady as he adjusted the seat and looked at the sheet music. It was a simplified version of a Strauss waltz, child's play compared to the Chopin he practiced at home. He took a deep breath and began to play. The notes flowed easily, the familiar 1-2-3 rhythm of the waltz filling the room. Andre didn't just play the notes as written. He added the subtle dynamics that made the music come alive, just as his grandmother had taught him. As he played, he was aware of the principal's surprised smile, of Lily and Deshawn's wide eyes, of Mrs. Winters' increasingly rigid posture. But mostly he lost himself in the music, in the joy of finally being able to show what he could do. When he finished, there was a moment of stunned silence before the principal began to applaud. That was excellent. Mrs. Winters, you didn't tell me you had such an accomplished pianist in your class. Mrs. Winters' face had gone pale. Andre has surprised us all today, she managed to say. The principal turned to Andre with genuine curiosity. How long have you been playing, young man? Since I was 5, Andre replied. My grandmother was my teacher until last year. She must have been very skilled, the principal said warmly, and dedicated to bring you to this level. Mrs. Winters cleared her throat. Yes, well, we still need to finish our rehearsal. Andre, thank you for stepping in, but please return to your percussion position now. But the principal wasn't ready to move on. Mrs. Winters, I'm curious, why is such a talented pianist playing the triangle in your showcase? Surely there's a more suitable role for his skills. The question hung in the air. Andre held his breath, feeling the eyes of every student on him and Mrs. Winters. Mrs. Winters' smile was so tight it looked painful. I was allowing newer students to start with simpler instruments while they adjust to our program standards. But perhaps in light of today's demonstration, some adjustments to the program would be appropriate. The principal nodded firmly. I think that would be excellent. Music education is about nurturing talent wherever we find it, isn't it? Of course, Mrs. Winters replied, her voice faint. As the bell rang and students began gathering their things, the principal stopped beside Andre's desk. That was truly impressive playing, she said quietly. You should be very proud. Andre nodded, a warm feeling spreading through his chest. Thank you. As he packed up his books, he noticed Mrs. Winters watching him from her desk. Her expression a complicated mix of surprise and something else, something that looked almost like shame. For the first time since he'd arrived at Westfield Elementary, Andre left music class with a smile on his face. He couldn't wait to tell his mother and Mr. Chen what had happened. Something had shifted today like the first crack in a dam. Mrs. Winters hadn't apologized. She hadn't admitted she was wrong about him. But she had been forced to see him, really see him maybe for the first time. And that, Andre thought as he walked to his next class with lighter steps, was a beginning. Word spread quickly through Westfield Elementary about what had happened in music class. By lunchtime, Andre found himself the center of attention as he sat with Lily and Deshawn in the cafeteria. Everyone's talking about how you showed up, Mrs. Winters, Lily said, her eyes wide with admiration. Tyler said he heard from Charlotte that the principal was super impressed. Andre poked at his mashed potatoes. I wasn't trying to show anyone up. I just wanted a chance to play. Well, you got it, Deshawn said with a grin. And from what I heard, you crushed it. Andre couldn't help smiling a little. It had felt good to finally show what he could do. To see the surprise on everyone's faces, especially Mrs. Winters. When he got home that afternoon, he burst through the door, eager to tell his mother everything. But the apartment was empty with a note on the refrigerator. Working double shift. Dinner in the fridge. Love you. His excitement dimmed slightly, but he sat at his keyboard anyway, playing through the pieces Mr. Chen had assigned, imagining how he would tell her the story when she got home. The next day, there was a different atmosphere in music class. Mrs. Winters was subdued, her usual sharp commands replaced with quieter instructions. When Andre entered, she didn't quite meet his eyes. I've made some adjustments to our showcase program, she announced at the beginning of class. Some students will be taking on new roles that better suit their demonstrated abilities. She handed out revised assignment sheets. Andre looked down at his paper and felt a leap of excitement. Instead of percussion triangle, it now read piano Viennese waltz with Tyler. It wasn't a solo, and it wasn't Chopin, but it was the piano, a real chance to play in front of everyone. These changes mean we have a lot of work to do before the showcase, Mrs. Winters continued. We'll need to rearrange our rehearsal schedule. As the class broke into groups to practice their parts, Mrs. Winters approached Andre's desk. You'll need to work with Tyler to coordinate the forehand arrangement, she said, her voice carefully neutral. He'll play the bass line while you handle the melody and harmonies. Andre nodded. Yes, ma'am. She hesitated as if about to say something more, then simply handed him the sheet music and moved on to the next group. Tyler slid into the seat next to Andre. Sorry about missing rehearsal yesterday, he said. My stomach bug was pretty bad. It's okay, Andre replied. Worked out for me. Tyler grinned. Yeah, I heard you killed it. We're gonna sound awesome together. As they looked over the music, Andre realized this arrangement was more complex than the simple version he'd played yesterday. This was the full piece with challenging runs and ornaments that would require serious practice. Mrs. Winters must really think you can play, Tyler observed, watching Andre study the difficult passages. This is harder than anything she's given me before. Andre felt a mix of pride and determination. We can do it, Over the next week, a new routine developed. Andre and Tyler would stay after school to practice on the piano in the music room. To Andre's surprise, Mrs. Winters often stayed too, listening and occasionally offering suggestions. More emphasis on the first beat of each measure, Andre, she would say. The waltz needs that strong pulse to guide the dancers. Or, Tyler, watch Andre's hands for the tempo changes. You need to stay perfectly synchronized. Her criticism was still sharp, but now it was actually helpful, focused on making the music better rather than making Andre feel small. One afternoon, as they were packing up after a particularly good rehearsal, Mrs. Winters paused by the piano. You've clearly had excellent training, she said, not quite looking at Andre. Your grandmother must have been a remarkable teacher. Andre nodded. She was. She played with the city orchestra for 30 years. What was her name? Mrs. Winters asked, something flickering in her expression. Eleanor Wilson, Andre replied. Mrs. Winters went very still. Eleanor Wilson? Who played first piano for the Metropolitan Symphony in the 80s and 90s? Andre stared in surprise. Yes, that's her. Did you know her? Mrs. Winters' face had gone pale. I attended many of her performances as a music student. She was legendary in certain circles. For the first time, Mrs. Winters looked directly at Andre, really seeing him. I had no idea you were Eleanor Wilson's grandson. Andre wasn't sure what to say. The way Mrs. Winters was looking at him now, with something like respect, maybe even awe, was so different from how she'd treated him before. She taught me everything I know about piano, he said simply. Mrs. Winters nodded slowly. It shows. The technique, the expression. I should have recognized her influence. But you didn't want to see it? Andre thought but didn't say. As if reading his mind, Mrs. Winters' expression shifted. A flash of what might have been shame crossing her face. Well, she said, gathering herself, we should all be grateful for her legacy. Keep practicing. The showcase is only 2 weeks away. That Saturday at the community center, Andre told Mr. Chen about the week's developments. So now you're playing piano in the showcase after all, Mr. Chen said, smiling. And Mrs. Winters finally realized who your grandmother was. Andre nodded, his fingers tracing patterns on the piano keys without pressing down. Yeah, but it feels weird, like she only respects me now because of my grandmother's name, not because of how I play. Mr. Chen considered this, his kind face thoughtful. That might be how it started, he agreed. But I think something else is happening too. You forced her to see past her assumptions to actually hear you. That's no small thing. I guess, Andre said, not entirely convinced. Sometimes people need help to overcome their biases, Mr. Chen continued. Your playing gave her that nudge and your grandmother's name might have been the final push. But what matters is that she's beginning to see you as you really are. The days flew by, filled with rehearsals and preparations. The more Andre and Tyler practiced, the better they sounded together. Even Mrs. Winters seemed pleased with their progress. The waltz is coming along nicely, she told them after one rehearsal. It will be a fitting finale for our showcase. 3 days before the performance, disaster struck. Tyler came to school with his right hand wrapped in a bandage. Broke. My finger playing basketball, he explained miserably to Andre. Doctor says no piano. For at least 3 weeks, Mrs. Winters was beside herself. This is a catastrophe. The waltz is our closing piece. We can't simply remove it from the program. Andre saw his opportunity. I could play both parts, he offered. I've been practicing the full version at home anyway. Mrs. Winters looked skeptical. The four-hand arrangement was complex enough, but the original is extremely challenging. Are you certain you can manage it? Yes, Andre said confidently. My grandmother taught me the full version last year. Mrs. Winters studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. Let's hear you play it now. Andre sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began. The music flowed from his fingers. The delicate melody, the strong bass line, the intricate harmonies all coming together in the joyful rhythm of the waltz. When he finished, the room was silent. He turned to find Mrs. Winters watching him with an unreadable expression. Well, she said finally, it seems Eleanor Wilson's grandson is indeed ready for a solo. The night of the showcase arrived, bringing with it a flutter of nerves in Andre's stomach. The auditorium was packed with parents, teachers, and students all buzzing with excitement. Backstage, the performers waited for their turns, some pacing nervously, others doing last-minute practices. Andre sat quietly going through the music in his head, his fingers moving slightly on his knees as if playing an invisible piano. Mrs. Winters moved among the students, checking instruments and giving encouraging nods. When she reached Andre, she paused. "Your grandmother's first concert with the Metropolitan Symphony was a Chopin program," she said unexpectedly. Andre looked up in surprise. "Yes, it was. She told me she was so nervous she nearly tripped walking onto the stage." A ghost of a smile touched Mrs. Winters' lips, but once she began to play, the audience forgot everything except the music. "I was there, in the audience. I was a first-year music student, and her performance was what made me decide to become a pianist myself." Andre stared at her, seeing a different person than the stern, dismissive teacher he'd known these past months. "I think," Mrs. Winters said softly, "she would be very proud of you tonight." Before Andre could respond, the backstage manager called for the next group, and Mrs. Winters moved away to help organize them. The showcase progressed smoothly, each group performing their piece to enthusiastic applause. Andre watched from the wings, his solo coming up last as the grand finale. Finally, it was his turn. As he walked onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinded him. He could make out his mother's face in the front row, her smile encouraging. Beside her sat Mr. Chen, who had come specially to see him perform. Andre settled himself at the piano, adjusting the bench, placing his hands on the keys. The audience grew quiet, waiting. In that moment of silence, a strange calm came over him. He thought of his grandmother, of the hours they'd spent at her piano, of her patience and love. He thought of his mother's unwavering support, of Mr. Chen's encouragement, of the long journey to this moment, and then he began to play. Not just the notes on the page, but the music behind them, the joy and elegance of the Viennese waltz pouring through his fingers. He played with all the skill his grandmother had taught him and all the emotion of his own story. When the final notes faded, there was a heartbeat of silence. Then the audience erupted in applause, rising to their feet. Andre stood and bowed, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. As he looked out at the cheering crowd, he caught Mrs. Winters' eye from the side of the stage. She was applauding too, her face transformed by a genuine smile. In that moment, Andre understood what his mother had meant about making people see you for who you really are. It wasn't about proving Mrs. Winters wrong or making her feel bad about her assumptions. It was about sharing his gift, letting the music speak for itself. As he took another bow, Andre knew that something important had changed, not just for Mrs. Winters, but for him too. He had found his voice, and now everyone could hear it. The Monday after the showcase, Andre walked into school with a new sense of confidence. All weekend, people had been congratulating him, neighbors who had attended, his mother's co-workers who had heard about it, even the cashier at the grocery store whose son was in 3rd grade at Westfield. "You are amazing," Lily said, rushing up to him in the hallway. "My parents couldn't stop talking about your playing all weekend." "Thanks," Andre said, smiling. It still felt a bit strange to have so much positive attention. "Dude, you're famous now," Deshawn added, falling into step beside them. "Even the 8th graders know who you are." As they headed to class, Andre noticed something different. Students who had never spoken to him before nodded or smiled as he passed. A 6th grader stopped him to ask if he gave piano lessons. The hall monitor, usually stern with everyone, gave him a thumbs up. In Mrs. Powell's class, things were mostly normal. Spelling tests and math problems didn't care if you could play Strauss. But when music class came around, Andre felt a flutter of nerves. He wasn't sure what to expect from Mrs. Winters now. She was already at her desk when the students filed in, sorting through sheet music with her usual precision. As Andre took his seat, he noticed her glance up, her eyes finding him briefly before returning to her task. "Before we begin today's lesson," she said once everyone was seated, "I want to congratulate all of you on an excellent showcase performance. Your hard work and dedication were evident, and you represented our music program beautifully." Her gaze swept across the room, pausing momentarily on Andre. "Some of you demonstrated exceptional talent, and I want you to know that I've taken note of that for future performances and opportunities." It wasn't exactly a personal apology or acknowledgement, but from Mrs. Winters it was something significant. Andre felt a small weight lift from his shoulders. After class, as students were packing up, Mrs. Winters called him to her desk. "Andre, I'd like a word." He approached cautiously, still not entirely sure where they stood with each other. Mrs. Winters straightened a stack of papers, not quite meeting his eyes. "I've been thinking about your performance at the showcase. It was quite remarkable for someone your age." "Thank you," Andre said. "I've spoken with the principal, and we agree that your talents could be better nurtured with more advanced instruction." She finally looked up at him. "There's a special music program at the Arts Academy downtown. They offer scholarships to promising students who might not otherwise have access to conservatory-level training." Andre blinked in surprise. "The Arts Academy, really?" The Arts Academy was famous throughout the city, a special school where students studied regular subjects in the morning and focused on their artistic talents in the afternoon. He'd heard about it from his grandmother but had never imagined he might go there. "Yes," Mrs. Winters continued, "I've taken the liberty of recommending you for their piano program. The scholarship would cover tuition and transportation costs. Of course, it would be up to you and your mother to decide if it's something you want to pursue." Andre was stunned. "I thank you. That's amazing." Mrs. Winters nodded, a hint of what might have been a smile touching her lips. "You have a gift, Andre. A gift that deserves proper nurturing." She hesitated, then added more softly, "I should have recognized it sooner. Your grandmother would have expected better of me." It was the closest thing to an apology Andre expected to get, and somehow it was enough. "There's one more thing," Mrs. Winters said, reaching into her desk drawer. She pulled out an old program, yellowed with age but carefully preserved. "I kept this from your grandmother's first performance with the Metropolitan Symphony. I thought you might like to have it." Andre took the program gently. There on the cover was a younger version of his grandmother, seated at a grand piano, her face serene and confident. "Eleanor Wilson performed Chopin," the elegant script announced. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with unexpected emotion. "This means a lot," Mrs. Winters nodded. "Your audition for the Arts Academy is next Tuesday afternoon. I've arranged for you to be excused from classes. I'd be happy to help you prepare if you'd like." That evening, Andre could hardly contain his excitement as he told his mother about the Arts Academy opportunity. "Mrs. Winters recommended you?" his mother asked, clearly surprised. "The same Mrs. Winters who gave you the triangle?" Andre laughed. "Yeah, I know. It's weird. But I think she finally sees me now." His mother pulled him into a hug. "I'm so proud of you, Andre. Not just for playing beautifully, but for how you handled everything. You didn't give up, and you didn't let someone else's small thinking make you small." The next week was a whirlwind of preparation. Every day after school, Andre practiced in the music room with Mrs. Winters, offering guidance. To his surprise, she was an excellent teacher when she actually tried, pointing out subtleties in the music he hadn't noticed before, helping him refine his technique. "Your left hand is still a bit heavy in the third movement," she would say. "Think of it as supporting the melody, not competing with it. Or, there's a story in this piece. What do you think the composer is trying to tell us here?" It was strange to see this new side of her, to realize she had this knowledge and passion that she'd never shown him before. Sometimes, watching her demonstrate a passage, Andre caught glimpses of the young music student, who had been inspired by his grandmother's playing all those years. Again, Mr. Chen was equally supportive when Andre told him about the Arts Academy opportunity. "This is wonderful news," he exclaimed during their Saturday session. "The Academy has an excellent program. You'll be challenged there in ways I can't provide here, but I'll still come on Saturdays," Andre assured him. "You're the one who helped me when no one else would." Mr. Chen smiled warmly. "My door is always open to you. But soon you'll have many doors opening." The day of the audition arrived, bringing with it a knot of nerves in Andre's stomach. His mother had taken the afternoon off work to accompany him, and to his surprise, Mrs. Winters had offered to drive them both to the academy. "It's on my way home," she said, though Andre suspected it wasn't. The Arts Academy was housed in a beautiful old building with towering columns and wide marble steps. Inside, the hallways were lined with artwork and photographs of famous alumni who had gone on to perform in prestigious venues around the world. In the waiting area outside the audition room, Andre's hands felt cold and a little shaky. His mother squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "You've got this," she whispered. "Just play like you always do." Mrs. Winters, sitting stiffly on a nearby chair, nodded in agreement. Remember what we discussed about the dynamics in the middle section. Let the music breathe. When his name was called, Andre stood, took a deep breath, and walked into the audition room. 3 judges sat at a table, their expressions neutral and professional. "Good afternoon, Andre," the woman in the center said. "We've heard good things about you. Please play whenever you're ready." Andre approached the grand piano, larger and more imposing than any he'd played before. He adjusted the bench, positioned his hands, and closed his eyes briefly. In his mind, he could see his grandmother, her gentle hands guiding his smaller ones over the keys. "Music isn't just in your fingers," she had told him. "It's in your heart. Play what you feel." He began with Chopin, the piece he had been practicing for weeks. The notes flowed from his fingers, filling the large room with sound. He lost himself in the music, forgetting the judges, forgetting his nerves, even forgetting where he was. There was only the piano and the story it was telling. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then the judges began to talk among themselves, nodding and making notes. The woman in the center smiled at him. "That was lovely, Andre. Do you have a second piece prepared?" He nodded and launched into the Strauss waltz from the showcase, the piece that had changed everything for him at Westfield Elementary. After the audition, he found his mother and Mrs. Winters waiting anxiously. "How did it go?" his mother asked, searching his face. Andre grinned. "I think it went really well. They asked lots of questions about how long I've been playing and what composers I like best." Mrs. Winters looked relieved. "That's a good sign. They don't waste time with additional questions unless they're interested." The acceptance letter arrived a week later, a thick envelope with the Arts Academy crest embossed on the front. Andre had been awarded a full scholarship to begin the following semester. The news spread quickly through Westfield Elementary. In the hallways, students and teachers stopped to congratulate him. Even the principal made a special announcement during morning assembly, celebrating Andre's achievement. "This is what we hope for all our students," she said, beaming at him, "to discover their gifts and find places where those gifts can flourish." On his last day in Mrs. Powell's class before transferring to the academy, his classmates threw a surprise party, complete with a cake decorated with a piano keyboard made of frosting. "We'll miss you," Lily said, giving him a quick hug. "But we're coming to all your concerts when you get famous." Deshawn presented him with a card signed by everyone in class. "Don't forget us little people," he joked. But there was genuine emotion behind his words. The most surprising goodbye came from Mrs. Winters. As Andre was cleaning out his music folder after the final class, she approached his desk. "I have something for you," she said, handing him a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. Andre opened it carefully. Inside was a book, the collected letters of Chopin, with a handwritten note on the first page. "To Andre, whose talent reminds us that music belongs to everyone who loves it enough to learn it. May your grandmother's legacy continue to inspire, Mrs. Winters." He looked up, touched by the gesture and the echo of his own grandmother's words. "Thank you." Mrs. Winters nodded, her usual reserve softened by a genuine smile. "You've taught me as much as I've taught you, Andre, perhaps more." As he walked out of Westfield Elementary for the last time, his mother waiting in the car to take him home, Andre thought about the journey of the past few months. He had arrived as a nervous new kid, unsure of his place and silenced by someone who refused to see his true abilities. Now he was leaving for an opportunity he had earned through his talent, perseverance, and courage to be himself even when others tried to put him in a box. The piano in the music room, the one Mrs. Winters had once forbidden him to touch, had become the instrument of his transformation. And somewhere Andre knew his grandmother was smiling,